There's a new version of Twin Terror that is terrorizing the ladder. It utilizes an underplayed 2 cost in Twitch to be the primary carry that almost nobody is playing around.
Twitch. We've got Twitch user here.
See, nobody cares.
If you play around the 4 core units of 2 Twitch, 2 Pantheon, 2 Vex, and 2 Amumu, it's also strong enough to scale into the late game and beat all these capped boards. In this episode of Into Deep, we hop on board with 2-time world finalist DQA, who plays this comp from any position as long as he gets a 2-1 augment. So buckle in and tighten your seatbelts because the Rat King is back. DQA is a multi-time Worlds finalist. He made it to Set 4 Fates Championship, where he almost made it to the final lobby. I think he just missed out by 1 or 2 points to get to the top 8. And he also made it to the Sec 6 World Championship for Gizmos and Gadgets. He's a really strong player that gets a lot of his edge through execution. He's a player that comes in with a preset game plan and is really good at playing to his specific outs, and is able to also play contested much better than a lot of other players because he knows all different kind of small different nuance and paths on how he gets there. Whether it's strong forecast, like he played around Kale in Set 4, or in Set 6 where he was known as a Warwick one trick, a dog Quinn abuser, if you will, DQA. He's a really fearsome player to go against, especially when he's in form. So we're gonna start off things with a Corki headliner. Corki is really powerful of an AD carry to play around. I think most people know by now that he's one of the strongest, if not the strongest, 1-cost headliner to play around. And so it's very likely that he's gonna be playing for a high tempo opening, and that is indicated by the fact that he's making 2-star units across the board. This is not an open fort situation where he sells everything and tries to loot streak. He's gonna try to play the best board possible, and right now he's piecing together different units that could work together. A lot of times when you're thinking about these kinds of early game openings, just think about holding pairs, just like what he's doing right now. He's holding Cassante pair, just holding like the Kennen as a possibility and hit that Kennen 2. Just play around whatever 2-stars you can get. And then Kennen can also link into things like the Lilia and the Sentinels and Superfans. So let's look at his augments and kind of break things down. Twin Terror is the augment that he's going to choose for this video. That's partially why we selected it, and I'm really interested in like what he ends up doing to get to the final piece, because I looked at the endgame composition that he played and he just doesn't really have any of these components. So I'm really interested to see how he actually takes Twin Terror and navigates to it, but just to also evaluate the other augments in case you're also dropped in the future spot and not sure if you want to take Twin Terror versus other things. Lucky Gloves is a little bit awkward because in the very beginning stages of the game, you really want to make sure that you can get multiple Lucky Gloves, and if you don't have already another glove, then you're not able to get 2 Thieves Gloves early on. A lot of times Lucky Gloves is really powerful in component anvil portals in particular, because you should be able to kind of open up and grab things like individual gloves so that you can make the Lucky Gloves. This is a completed item anvil, so very unlikely that you open it up and get offered a straight up Thieves Glove, so it can be kind of tricky to guarantee that. Lucky Gloves is also really good in the mid stages of the game because a lot of times you're able to roll for like a 2-cost or a 3-cost headliner and immediately place things like that Lucky Gloves onto a powerful 2-star so you can get that value. In the early game, it can be kind of tricky if you don't have the upgrades. In this situation, he does have the upgrades, but I don't think Lucky Gloves is nearly as powerful as it is in the mid stage of the game when you have a lot of item economy, and it makes a lot of sense. Hedge Fund is also another option you could choose here, but it's usually to try and maximize your gold early, and a lot of times you pick this if you're lose streaking so you can get to that max interest to 10 as soon as possible and sell your board. And because he already has one of the strongest 1-cost headliners to play around and he has a possible way to tempo, I don't think it's Hedge Fund in this spot. Another case you would take Hedge Fund is if you are opening a lot more gold and fewer components in general, so you just lean into the fact that you're econing. So a pretty good rule of thumb is if you make gold interest in stage 1, you can definitely take things like Hedge Fund because you're already ahead economically, so you're going to snowball farther ahead. He rerolls option 2 and 3. Talent Search is a late game option. Usually Talent Search is really good as the cherry on top once you're able to get to like a level 9 board and you 2-star a bunch of 5 costs and really powerful 4 costs, and then all of a sudden your board just gets really powerful and scales. It's not something you pick early unless you're trying to scale something, but a lot of times you don't really get that option. And then Hologram is also something very similar where it's really good as the capstone to like a really powerful reroll composition, or if you're able to, you know, capitalize off of a really powerful duplicated unit that has good synergy, like for example Hologram into, you know, Country, where getting that extra clone scales that Dreadsteed. But he does end up picking Twin Terror, and I think it's the most powerful option out of all the 5 augments he saw. We rip the Anvil, and immediately off the top of his head he says I could end up going for either the Last Whisper, Infinity Edge as the AD options, but because he already has a belt, he can can make that belt into an even shroud. And if he takes Last Whisper, he's kind of lacking a lot of that emphasis of straight up damage. And so Infinity Edge here ends up being a strong pick. Not to mention that a second part of Infinity Edge and Jewel Gauntlet, people still kind of don't really realize if they haven't played a lot of games of the set. If your holder's abilities can already critically strike, gain 10% critical strike damage instead. So that ends up being very good for executioners. In the past, people felt really bad if they slammed something like IE or Jewel Gauntlet and they had augments like Jeweled Lotus offered. That felt really bad because it's like, wow, I just got lost in augment in value because, you know, I don't really have the ability to capitalize off this crit when it already gives me crit. So this has been a change that happened at the beginning of set 10 and now is really powerful. And so if you end up playing an executioner based strategy, now you actually do want to stack crit and things that give extra crit abilities like Infinity Edge and executioners or even Jeweled Lotus. So that extra crit strike damage is a really strong multiplier. The reason why crit is so good in TFT is you're trying to find ways that multiply off each other as much as you can, because things that are additive, like getting like a little bit extra more AD or getting a little bit more HP, getting a little bit more raw AP, has diminishing returns after a certain point. Because of the way the damage formula works, you're better off multiplying a lot of those factors, right? That's why when you're playing AD, you want not only raw attack damage, but also attack speed, because attack speed multiplies the effectiveness of how often you're attacking. And then crit is another multiplier, but crit is also one of the strongest multipliers in the game, because as you cap out with that 100% guaranteed crit, it is so much more powerful in scaling that it is difficult for other people to really control and anticipate unless they have something like Bramble Vest and get to the right positioning to stop your AD carry. So this is a really, really good setup here for DQA. He also has a second Corki. Other people are not playing units, so he's getting free wins. Everything is going according to plan. And so the build that he's going to try to go for is most likely Twin Terror, Twitch, Vex as the executioners. The thing about Twin Terror is it gives you health, attack speed, and critical strike chance. And that critical strike chance, if you cap out at 100 already, converts to critical strike damage. That was the thing that was complained about, where if you had additional crit over 100%, it felt like it was useless. So they give you a conversion ratio of critical strike chance above 100 into actual damage. So that multiplier can be insanely powerful if we're able to cap out with a lot of stats behind it. But remember, he still wants to go for high base damage because the multiplier of crit only works based off of how much raw AD and how much damage you have as a base. And that's where going for 3 stars and rerolls can be really powerful, because you might be thinking, well, Twin Terror could be good with, you know, 2 star 4 costs and, you know, go for like 2 5 costs maybe. But when you star something up, you get higher base stat value, right? You get more HP, you get more AD AP, and your abilities to deal more damage. So that's the effect that DQA is going for. He actually has an 8th Corki here on Carousel that he can chase. Funny enough, he actually can go for a Corki 3 here. And the thing about this 8th Corki is that while he could end up rolling for a Corki 3, it's still not something that is naturally lending itself to what makes Twin Terror really strong, because the second Corki isn't really benefiting from that critical strike chance, but only the first one is. And so the only way that this can actually be something that's really good for the Corki and maybe the Caitlyn Riven is if he's able to get something like Jeweled Lotus so everything crits. Otherwise, that critical strike chance doesn't really matter very much based off of the fact that his abilities can't crit across the board. So yeah, just that's why a lot of people are going back to executioners as some of the base reason of why they want Twin Terror. If you played other previous sets, this is very similar to an augment called Double Trouble, which gave you different stats in general. It gave you like a bunch of armor and magic resistance and ability power and attack damage. And so it was a lot more versatile because it just gave you like defensiveness and some baseline stat power. That's why I felt like you could Double Trouble like anything. Twin Terror is a much more specific and niche type of reroll composition that you end up going for. And that's why he's giving up on this Corki, because he recognizes that late game, this is going to fall off. And he is playing a composition that has a lot of high cap potential if he's able to lean into executioners in particular. A little bit sad though, because I mean, 8 Corkis makes you feel like you should just try to go for it. How bad could it really be? Corki 3 this early on. But there's one thing you have to keep in mind is that this is a prismatic based lobby. And so when you have a prismatic to start off things in the lobby, baseline power level of everyone's composition is going to be much stronger. So yeah, Corki 3 can be really good, but how strong really is Corki 3 when everyone's getting strong prismatics online in a challenger lobby that you have to be really fearful of like how everyone scales up? It's actually not nearly as good relative to everybody else. If it was like a silver lobby and you had like, you know, Corki 3 really early, that's where I think he can really shine, because he's not necessarily as high of a ceiling as some of the other compositions. Oh my god, he just gets a natural Corki 3. That is actually so funny, because the game actually just gave him Corki 3 and a Caitlyn. Okay, so I was talking about how initially maybe he's going to sell the Corkis, but I mean, the game just gave him Corki 3. So just play it temporarily. That has to be your strongest board right now, because Corki 3 is way stronger than 2 Twitch 1s. Man, I didn't even realize that he was going gonna be able to hit Corki through just like that. And so, you know, what's really funny is that he can actually play this the entire stage and capitalize off the tempo. So right now, he actually doesn't even have to do very much. He's very strong. He doesn't have a streak to preserve with the wins, but he's gonna be able to preserve a lot of HP and really take his time and not have to rush. Because a lot of people that play this composition, they're gonna be low on economy, so they end up trying to like go for a big level 6 roll down at 3-2, and they have to find like the exact kind of units that they're looking for. They have to find like Twitch headliner. They have to go for like the Vex, Twitch, and maybe like an Amumu and a Pantheon. So a lot of people feel like they have to go for a big amount of gold spend on 3-2 level 6, but now he doesn't have to because he's playing around that early Corki 3, which is really fun. Let's take a look at his augments here and see what is standing out to us. Silver Veil is generically really strong because the fact that at 1 your team gets 5% attack speed is just a nice little boost, and also because he's trying to do a lot of physical damage, that attack speed is actually really nice. It multiplies the effectiveness of having like Twitch 3 and going for the attack speed. Not to mention that the first crowd control effect in combat is really good in the current meta because there's a lot of people that are trying to go for big AoE stuns. It gives you flexibility of like where Twitch, for example, is going to be positioned because of things like crowd divers that like jump to the corner and your corner carries are going to get stunned, or if your opponent's putting Thresh on the correct side and goes for that AoE CC. So Silver Veil does stand out to me as one of the stronger options. Keepers in general is very inflexible. It just requires you to ball up every single time, and the trade-off of balling up either has to be so good for the composition or else you're not going to really get much value off of it. Keepers is really good only in disco because the center ball counts as a unit, so the center ball of disco actually grants a shield to everybody else. So Keepers is really good in disco, and it also can be playable in like a sentinel like KDA variation if you end up having something that like naturally wants to stay stacked in like a Keepers formation. Other than that though, I don't think Keepers is very good. Healing Orbs is actually decent for front to back compositions. Front to back meaning things that have to go through your tank and not get access to your backline, like things that jump and assassinate the backline is more back to front because they're trying to kill the backline first before they get to the front. And the reason why is because Healing Orbs, as the Twitch and the Vex and other executioners deal damage, they're going to heal that front line, and so it's kind of like a sustained like pipeline where when you're able to position like your carries to try to very quickly take down a unit, it'll heal that frontline unit. He rerolls the middle and sees Cybernetic Uplink. Uplink is like okay, it gives you a little bit of mana and HP, which is really nice, but it's not particularly powerful unless you have a lot of items. This is an item-based portal, so it's okay. I can see it being like a solid pick. Just kind of like nice to have a little bit extra HP across the board. I will say that because we have Twin Terror, Cybernetic Uplink is a little bit less important. I would say that because we have Twin Terror, Cybernetic Uplink is not nearly as important for the HP factor because we already have a lot of bonus HP across the board due to Twin Terror, assuming we're doubling up. But the 2 mana per second could be nice because the faster that things like Twitch and Vex can cast, the more impactful it could be. But the 5% attack speed also kind of helps a little bit as well. This is sort of a math question, so if you really want to nerd out, you could do it where you say like, okay, you get 5% attack speed, how much mana is that generating relative to 2 mana per second? And I think a blink is a little bit more mana across the board because that means every 5 seconds you get an extra bonus 10 mana, which could end up being the difference maker. But I'm not going to do the math. I'm actually not really a math-based TFT player. I'm much more intuition-driven, so I don't necessarily think that this uplink is actually even that much better than Silver Veil. Oh, he ends up rolling into Young, Wild, and Free. Young, Wild, and Free is generally better when you're ahead because you're able to, leapfrog and grab things off carousel before people who are lower HP. So it's really good when you're like, in the top half of HP. And I think that's actually something that can stand out to him right now. Not to mention, even though he does have Infinity Edge, his item economy is a little bit on the weaker side because he doesn't actually have like 3 items for Twitch yet. He really wants to get like another sword, another bow, and even shroud because his components are kind of awkward with like the crown guard and that extra belt. So like he's in a situation where Young, Wild, and Free can be really, really beneficial. The other reason to pick Young, Wild, and Free usually is if you are trying to look for like a specific component off carousel, like a spatula. Spatula is not particularly powerful in his current setup unless he wants to play for 6-8-bit in pivots. But usually if you're trying to play for like an 80 flex situation, trying to go for something kind of really powerful like the True Damage Emblem or whatever, you can pick Young, Wild, and Free. Tiny Titans is his third option, and Tiny Titans is like economy based augments. He ends up choosing Tiny Titans, which is interesting. I kind of thought that he was going to go for either Silver Veil or Healing Orbs, but he goes for Tiny Titans instead. And Tiny Titans choice here basically says that he wants to focus on economy because he recognizes that he's really poor relative to where he wants to be, right? He has level 6 30 gold, and other people have 40 gold of interest that can see by each rung here on the right side. Some people have 50 gold already, so he's kind of behind economically. So he said that he's going to utilize this opportunity to get cheap rerolls with Punk every single round because, you know, he's able to roll on 6 very cheaply for a discount, and also recognize that he's going to play this Quirky 3 to try to preserve HP until he's able to get to a good spot. He knows that his board is not very good in stage 3. And it's funny because, you know, you would think that with this Quirky 3, he's like, wow, you know, he's high rolling, he's so strong. Quirky 3 for free, but like he's actually not winning a lot of these fights. He's kind of win-loss, which is actually terrible for economy because he's not able to get a consistent streak. In some ways, you'd rather just either full loss or full win. If you're in Titans, maybe you just want to get your economy back up and go for a full loss. So in this situation, the fact that he's able to even make 40 and still have all his HP gives him a lot of time to hit. And you know what? Now that I think about it, with Young, Wild, and Free, even if he grabbed like an extra sword or whatever, that wouldn't really fix all of his item issues. And the best item that he could probably think about right now is Even Shroud. Oh my god, 3 spatulas. That's gonna be a lot of people spamming things like true damage this game. That's not good. And also, by the way, there are no cloaks on this carousel, which is what he's looking for, and bows. I would take another sword here as he's floating an extra glove. You don't want to make these gloves on you know, one of your other units unless you're playing Lucky Gloves. I guess funny enough, you probably would have gotten things like Lucky Gloves value if you end up picking it. So this item situation is actually kind of awkward here for DQA. Uses his discounted roll, finds an Amumu. Amumu definitely goes in. Kind of ping-ponging back and forth on who to put Crown Guard in. The question is, who do we itemize, Amumu or Pantheon? And the answer is usually whoever provides you a more consistent frontline first. But in terms of scaling, Pantheon is a lot more reliable and better in the early mid game, and then Amumu is a lot stronger in the late game, especially once you get 3-star Amumu. 3-star Amumu absolutely clears Pantheon, but a lot of times Pantheon 2 outperforms Amumu. At 1-star, they're both kind of bad. So I guess in this case, DQA says Amumu has higher ceiling. I have Tiny Titans. I'm going to go for like a huge amount of power in the late game, and I'm sacking a lot of my mid game. That being said, he ended up slamming a guard breaker because he already has one extra belt that he doesn't really need, and he has to find a way to make use of these components. Guard breaker is a crit item because it uses 1 glove, and so it gives him extra bonus damage. And guard breaker is actually a little bit underrated because there are a good amount of units that shield, especially because Crown Guard is such a popular slam. If you position units with guard breaker in front of like the Crown Guard users, you're going to always activate that bonus damage, which can be really huge. And that's another form of a multiplier as well. So there is the base damage, there is the attack speed, there is critical strike chance, and then there's the bonus damage. That is actually the core 4 pillars of AD of what you're trying to think about as 4 stats that multiply off each other. But then if you get like additional bonus AD, that's just, you know, additional flat stats that you're adding, and that also applies to bonus damage as well. So a lot of times people think like, oh, Giant Slayer and Guard Breaker and, you know, maybe like an Augment that gives you bonus percentage damage, and Jazz. Those are all just bonus damage that just adds on top of each other. They don't actually multiply, for anyone that's curious. Okay, so now we got successfully to the end of stage 3, and now we're going to sell that Corgi because he's fallen off, and for the most part, we're trying to commit to our extra goal for re-rolling, and look at that. We're able to hit Twitch 3 very quickly. That was very fortunate. And now, all of a sudden, look at our items. We got dropped another bow, so we can go for Giant Slayer as well, or even a second Infinity Edge if we want to really go for big-time crit. So let's pause here, actually, because he actually has a couple of different ways he can itemize. The first thing is that he could just go for raw stats through like Deathblade, and then try to like go for a Deathblade plus Guard Breaker, and then try to play around like Last Whisper. People would be looking at this spot and saying, you don't have armor shred, so why not go for Last Whisper? The thing about that is right now, currently Even Shroud is not only more reliable to play around because it's an aura based item and it doesn't really depend on who's attacking it with Last Whisper, but you get to put 3 full damage items onto your carry. And so if you're going to be using this bell for Even Shroud guarantee, Last Whisper loses value. And you also remember that he's also last pick, so he has to think about what components he's likely to get on a stage 4 carousel. And a lot of times currently in the metagame, people are leaving things like Rod and Cloak to be the last components, so chances are he's very likely to get a Cloak and not something like a belt or a tier, which could be other really good defensive items for his Mumu, because those are going to be gone really quickly. And so he's thinking about his holistic item economy, not just like what he can slam right now, but also what components he's going to be getting later. And the other thing to think about is, does Guardbreaker even go onto Twitch? The other thing about Guardbreaker is it also gives you some attack speed and AP. And AP, while Twitch can use some of those stats, is actually much better for Vex. And so I think that if you kind of look at it in totality here, DQA has the ability to go for Last Whisper and Deathblade and Guardbreaker, or you can go for Giant Slayer and another Infinity Edge, go for that max cap crit out that we're talking about, and then put Guardbreaker onto something like Vex or his second Twitch if he really wants to. Amumu. I think in this spot too, another thing to think about is Punk also gives you a lot of flat AD. Punk says that for each gold that you're using to reroll, you get extra stats like HP and AD. So it's kind of like Twitch is scaling his own Deathblade, if you will. So you don't really want to put 2 Deathblades on Twitch if you think about it. That's what his trait is giving him. So for the formula, he currently has Infinity Edge. He gets a bunch of AD. What do we really want? Bonus damage and attack speed if possible. I will say Last Whisper does give some a bonus attack speed, but in here, I think in general, Giant Slayer is really good. Not to mention that Giant Slayer also is really powerful because there's so much reroll in the meta, and there's a lot of 3 stars. Whenever you know that there's a lot of 3 stars in the meta game, there's a lot of reroll in the lobby or whatever, Giant Slayer goes up in value because it's much more likely that these units are going to cross over that HP threshold to get that bonus damage. And Giant Slayer is incredible if you're able to proc it consistently against those targets. So that all being said, I anticipate him to slam the Giant Slayer. I could also see him not slamming Infinity Edge and waiting for the Augment to potentially influence his decisions. But this makes the most sense to me here. I will say that all things considered, his front line is looking very fragile, but he has so much raw power to this Twitch 3. And just look at how much crit damage is coming through. Let's go ahead and rewind actually and just look at how much damage this Twitch is doing. It's crazy. 346, 353, 300, 871 on the crit for his cast. He's legitimately 2 to 3 tapping all these different units. And if you think about it, right, these 2-star units have anywhere from like, you know, 1,000 to 1,300 HP. So you're telling me him 1 attack plus 1 cast can kill a lot of these units that are still trying to just get online. And that's for people who are hitting, right? They're 2-star units. His crit is going absolutely nuts and is overpowering so many different people. All right, so let's take a look at what are these augments at 4-2. When you're taking something like teaming up, there's 2 components that you're thinking about. One is what are the support items that are really good? In this case, it'd be like aura-based items that help amplify either things like our backlines through like a Zeke's attack speed is really good. I don't think Chalice is particularly powerful for Twitch because he doesn't use that AP nearly as well. And that bonus mana could be helpful, but not that important. I would think that teaming up is really good for things like Locket on his front line or Virtue of the Martyr, things that can help make his front line a little bit tankier and more supportive so that way he can have his Twitch just, you know, get those crits and scale. Heavy hitters is better than usual because our units that we're getting twin terror value have a lot more HP. So this is already like an augment that gets boosted because of other augments. And that's something you should definitely think about whenever you're weighing augment choice. Like, dude, how much better is this augment than average because I'm re-rolling or because I have another augment that multiplies off of it? Remember, this is the big story of this game. Multiplicative value. Unified Resistance is also not bad at all because it gives us a lot more frontline, and Unified Resistance is really good for our tanks. So I could see a case for Unified Resistance as well. I would say that Unified doesn't really benefit our Twitch and our Vex nearly as much because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of backline access, but sometimes it can be clutch. So I would say either option 2 or 3 right now. I probably wouldn't pick teaming up. I don't think we need any of the 4 costs. I mentioned there's a second component of teaming up. Are there any 4 costs that we're particularly looking at right now? Probably not. He rerolls options 1 and 3. Harm Assist is okay, but Harm Assist is a lot better for units that put themselves in danger because they need more healing, like melee carries, because they just end up taking a lot of damage naturally from just being in melee range. And he doesn't really need that nearly as much. The other situation is if backline is just getting splashed a lot through like Ezreal's and Caitlyn's, and sometimes Harm Assist helps you heal back up. But it's important to remember that this composition in general is very burst oriented because executioners, you're trying to crit and try to like burst past a bunch of front lines. You're not necessarily trying to like have a long drawn out fight. And so Omnivamp gets better for sustained fights, right? If you're trying to auto attack a lot and you're trying to like scale your composition, things that like, you know, really need time to get online. And so Harm Assist is like okay and solid, but not necessarily that impressive. And Know Your Enemy is kind of awkward because he only has 4 traits and he also has 4 unpopular traits. Ain't nobody playing Punk this late in the game. And a lot of people prefer like Bruisers and Sentinels compared to Guardians right now for their front line. And so he's unlikely to get Know Your Enemy value. So Heavy Hitter seems like the logical choice here. And that's what he ends up going for. Hits a Mumu, and you know, all those extra Punk rolls have been really beneficial. Like he did hit this Twitch 3 early, but he's been using all those rolls to like accumulate those Twitches over time. And so when he had, you know, 3-4 Twitches and he hits a Twitch headliner, he was already very likely to hit that Twitch 3. Another question that people might ask is what is the best version of Twitch? I actually didn't cover this, but you actually prefer Executioner Twitch, not Punk Twitch. And this is because you don't actually really care about 4 Punk because you are forced to play around Pantheon and Twitch. That means you have to play like a Vi and a Jinx, and those aren't really strong units in the late game. So he actually didn't even get the ideal Twitch, but you have to play around whatever you're given. And so in this case, he's going for 4 Punk. The extra boost in stats for the health and AD is like kind of minor, and it's not worth the trade-off of having to play a Vi 1. And if he had Executioner though, he'd be able to play for 4 Executioners, and that gives him even more bonus crit and damage, which is exactly what he's looking for in a burst-oriented into composition. One thing to pay attention to is how he's trying to position. I'm a little bit surprised that he's not actually clumping. A lot of times you actually want the Twitches and the Vexes kind of close to each other because they tend to pocket AoE the same thing. Pay close attention to how this Twitch casts, for example. So when Twitch casts, he's going to be focusing on like this pocket, and Vex is going to be focusing on this pocket, and Twitch is going to be focusing here. A lot of times you want to be trying to focus down the same target. So it is interesting that he's trying to spread things out. Okay, it looks like Vex and Twitch are now focusing this Riven 3. This is a 2-item Riven, so it looks like it's just not enough to get through the front line quickly. But you could see that like if Kerm was just a little bit stronger and a little bit tankier, that spread out damage was like not actually focus firing things like the Riven and tank that could have ended up biting him in the butt. The upside is, you know, he positioned around crowd divers, he positioned around, you know, corner targeting things like Caitlyn. So it's a trade-off, right? It's not exactly like, you know, always better to do A versus B. These frontline items, he needs even shroud, and he finally gets armor reduction, which is really huge. It took way too long to get to this armor reduction, but again, he knew that cloak would be like towards the end of the carousel picks. Finds 3 Samiras, which actually would have been nice if he was able to get to level 8 and play around 4 Executioner, but does not end up getting that. Gets that very discounted punk roll. Ton of true damage emblem, Yone 3, Riven 3. This lobby is very, very strong. Just by the virtue that we hit on time and we have a lot of HP, should mean that this is at least a top 4. He is going up against a disco board, and this disco board frontline is just tanking like all of our damage. And so this is like a matchup where we're gonna have to focus fire a little bit more, and I hope that DQ is paying attention to that kind of stuff. Not to mention that the opponent has little buddies Disco, which is really obnoxious. Disco plays a lot of small units already, like Nami and Gragas, so you just have so much extra bonus HP on all those 4 costs and 5 costs. Our plan is to get to level 8 and probably roll. I think in this instance, a lot of people will be thinking, should I stay at 7 and roll for a Mumu? But we do spike if we're able to get level 8 and get a second Vex, because that adds a lot of damage. And we're also really far away from going a Mumu 3 and Vex 3. So right now, he currently only has 4 Vexes and 4 Mumus, but the main goal that he's trying to get to right now is see if he can get to Vex 3 and a Mumu 3. That's like the top of his mind. There are a lot of 3 costs out of the pool. That is really nice for him to think about with Riven and Yone. And so it is likelier for him to hit the 3 cost 3 stars, but he's not going to hit it anytime soon unless he's able to high roll. In terms of items of what he can pick here, a lot of times you want to see if you can get like a mana based item onto Vex, but she does have emo, so you don't always have to go for a mana based item. In this situation, you also are thinking about like what is effective against the lobby, and it turns out there's a lot of AD with like Riven 3, Yone 3. A lot of people think like, okay, well, if you want a defensive item, why not go for like Dragon's Claw? But Dragon's Claw is not very good against a lot of the lobby that's focused on AD, right? There's true damage, there's Yone 3, there's Riven 3. So Dragon's Claw is not very effective. Not to mention that Dragon's Claw is not even that good against AP, but that's a separate discussion entirely. So if you went for like D-Claw plus Shojin, I don't think that's actually very effective. The alternative is to say, hey, let's focus on like a really good, you know, Vex item here. But the thing is, Shojin is not that good of a Vex item because Shojin in general is like kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. The best mana generation item for Vex is Red Buff because of the attack speed and the bonus damage that also amplifies that. So in this case, you know, DQA probably is just thinking about something that can be really good for defensive items. So the best defensive item that's left over is Adaptive Helm on the Amumu, and then probably it's whatever left over to go for Vex. So with a floating sword, it basically would be either Giant Slayer or Shojin. Either works. And he chooses to go for Giant Slayer. That is totally fine. He has additive bonus damage, but that's okay because, you know, sometimes you can't always just pick like the best in this situation. I think I actually in hindsight would like Shojin a little bit more. We already have Guardbreaker. And I do think that part of the reason why I picked Giant Slayer is because there's so many 3 stars in the lobby. I think it's like debatable depending on what he views as really important, but I could see a case for both. Okay, we have 7 Pantheons as well. Another thing to think about of why he's not going to 8 actually is because he needs to roll for Pantheon 3, and that's something I didn't actually even consider as well, is that how far behind he was on Pantheon and Mumu and Vex. And so for all those reasons combined, it's kind of like really inconsistent for him to try to go to 8. At one point in time, I actually thought about whether or not he should be going to 8 because you want to get like double Vex and you still want to keep this 4 Punk synergy in, which is important, but like kind of unfortunate that we have to play a Vi 1. But you know, we hit Twitch 3 and then we capitalized by having a really high tempo in stage 4, but then, you know, we didn't hit anything else for the most part. We're stuck on like Pantheon 2, Amumu 2, Vex 2. And so now we're kind of like, you know, paying the price of that, which is a bunch of people have gotten strong and scaled. We're trading our HP for economy. The question will be how much he decides to commit to rolling a lot of gold. And it's usually timed based off his HP count. Nice, we hit Vex 3. That's actually really big. And now he ditches the 4 Punk. Like 4 Punk is, again, we kind of talked about how 4 Punk is like nice, but not important, especially because he has to play like a Vi 1. If you also think about it, 4 Punk gives him extra HP, and the extra AD stats that you get is nice for Twitch, but at this point now we're also playing Vex 3, so we want to actually have a a more versatile composition. Another way you can think about it is 4 Punk is benefiting 3 units, which is Twitch, Vi, and the Pantheon, and having 2 Amumus benefits pretty much everybody because you have a stronger frontline. Also probably go for a 3rd Vex item. It's probably Hodge or Gnasher's Tooth, one or the other. Okay, so Hodge is taken, so it's got to be Gnasher's Tooth. Hodge is pretty decent for the extra crit because it also is using a glove item. But Gnasher's Tooth is also really good for the mana casts. Okay, we hit the 6th copy of Amumu. Now we can keep getting those rolls in for very cheap. DQA very much just chilling. Right now he is 80 HP over everybody else. And for the most part, I think he's guaranteed like top 2, top 3. Just has to figure out positioning stuff. Someone has 8 poppies. So he is actually factoring that poppy 3 as part of his builder because he needs to deny that poppy 3. The person has a duplicator as well with new recruit, but looks like they used it early on. Okay, looks like he puts the poppy into the team builder, just recognizing that poppy 3 is the only out that could probably stop him at this point. And so poppy 3 is pretty scary. If that player is able to get to poppy 3 and have a board like that, that is one way for him to potentially lose. So now he's actually trying to play denial. I mean, he is playing Twitch, so I guess he has to be a rat. Didn't realize DQ is such a role player. So he did roll a little bit to see if he can deny it, but now he needs to kind of commit to it. I'm actually surprised he didn't roll like heavier to try to deny the poppy, but he still also needs to find his own units, like, you know, Pantheon 3, Mumu 3, one off both, hits Pantheon 3. He probably thinks about itemizing for Pantheon at this point because he has 3 items on Vex and Twitch and a Mumu. Picks up a Steadfast Heart. So Steadfast Heart here is, I mean, it's just fine. Just help get a little bit of tankiness in. Unfortunately, our Vex is positioned in front of this tentacle, and with Alawi reviving it, that usually means that Vex wastes a lot of her burst on this tentacle. So we lost half our damage. That's something to think about. Don't try to have Vex in front of things like target dummies and Alawi tentacles because they end up wasting a lot of her DPS. I mean, Alawi's just so good for that reason. Just 2 tentacles end up absorbing so much damage a lot of times if your opponent's in this position. But it could be that he was also positioning generically around the Yone because Yone 3 is also really scary, especially with Silver Veil because that stops the CC. Kind of talking about how he was splitting up his Vexes with positioning. Try and, you know, make sure that he's hedging his bets. He's going up against a Ghost. This should be a lot easier than usual. And so this is a pretty nice free win here. And he also got some pretty good, you know, preview of how the fight's going to go in terms of like the crowd diver flow. The crowd divers were all like targeting the Vex in the corner and away from his Twitch. One thing to note is that Twitch here, 2 hexes away from the corner. So crowd divers do a 1 hex AoE. They'll stun the things like the Twitch and the Vex. Opponent is selling board, trying to roll for Poppy 3. Oh my gosh, he actually hit Poppy 3. But they sold like half their board to get there. Look at the... He has so many items on the bench. 1-star Jin, 1-star Corki, 1-star Senna. And also we have 3 units focus firing this Poppy. This is actually really exploitative. He knows that his opponent was focused on rolling, so they're not going to position Poppy. Puts everything on the left side to try to bully this Poppy as soon as possible. So yeah, this is actually another tip that you can do is if you know your opponent's rolling and they're not focusing on positioning at all, just go ahead and position hard for them because you can take advantage of the fact that they were busy rolling and they didn't even get all their items on in time. More rat tactics by DQA, the king of rats. Redemption, just a 3rd item for Pantheon, or 2nd item rather. And I think with the Poppy 3 threat nullified, it's pretty much just Yone that is standing in the way of us and guarantee victory. We have 65 HP though, so we have a lot of chances to hit even a Mumu 3. We still can scale up with a Mumu 3. Has to be careful about Kiana as well. You don't want Kiana to lock onto things like your Mumu and your Pantheon, but it is a Kiana 1 and she doesn't have mana items. Keeping close tabs on positioning as well. You can see that he's like regularly clicking on his opponent's board to see where the Yone is. No movement on that Yone, but focus firing on the left side. I mean, I think there's just too much damage. I think this Yone can't actually compete and looks like the Yone player is dead, and that should be the game. Nice, we hit a Mumu 3. Last player that he's going up against is a Disco player, and we were just positioning badly because of the things like the tentacles. So as long as we put our units in the bottom center and focus fire on the tanks instead of the tentacles, we're good to go. He could end up getting outplayed if your opponent ends up swapping like the front line and putting like the tentacles in the middle, but a lot of Disco players don't actually do that because, well, they just kind of AFK their positioning, quite frankly, but also because I think it really is disruptive to a lot of the way they position. But so this is actually a pro tip. A lot of Disco players just generally leave their stuff in the center, and you can always take advantage of that with giant like burst and nuke AoE champions like, you know, Vex, Twitch, if you're playing like Senna 3, other things like that. So as you can see, the new Twin Terror Twitch Vex comp is extremely powerful. Executioners capitalize on those stats very well, and if you guys get a spot, even if you have like, you know, those AP openers, it's very, very good, especially if you can hit Twitch on time. What did you guys think of DQA's play? Let me know if I missed anything in the comments below. And in case you haven't heard, I have a second YouTube channel that's starting dedicated to my own games and highlights from stream that aren't necessarily part of the educational original deep dives of this channel. So make sure to go and sub and like and subscribe. Any kind of early views and likes and subs go a really long way for the algorithm. So thank you very much ahead of time. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always, and I'll see you guys next time.